Welcome everyone to Open Stutter. Today we're going to be talking to Jenny McGuire, someone I've known for a long time, former client and also a good friend. She has a lot of insight about her journey and I'm really excited to talk to her about it. Hey Jenny, how are you doing?
Great. How are you, Vivian?
Good, very, very good. So we get to talk about stuttering today. Yeah, not that we don't talk about it all the time, but
It's one of my favorite
yeah.
topics.
But I have to say that every time anybody hears you talk about it, whether they're on a panel or other video you've done, you make such an impact on them in terms of the way you talk about stuttering. I'm not sure if it's your openness or your genuineness or whatever it is, or just your delightful personality. I don't know what it is, but everybody remembers what you say.
Hmm.
And so that's one of the reasons I really wanted you to do this interview today and get your ideas out to everyone.
Nice.
How does it feel talking about your stuttering? How does it feel just to be out there talking about it at a time when it's not so raw and painful as it used to be?
Um, well, tied into this concept that we talk about a lot, which is how stigma plays a big role in our problems with stuttering. Um, I think it really depends on the situation. I love talking about stuttering if it's in a context like this, where I'm being asked by a professional in the field and people will choose to watch it if they're interested. I would feel worse if it was like, I don't know, a cop pulling me over and then asking me why I talk like that. So I think, again, I would love to get beyond a context dictates how I feel about myself, worldview,
Mhm.
but that's where I am right now. So in this context, it's great to talk about
That's
stuttering.
great. Do you resonate with that identity these days?
The identity of a person who
Person stutter,
stutters.
yeah.
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, 110%. In
How
fact,
does that come out in your life?
mm, so um, it comes out in that I stutter with every interaction and every situation. Um, I still have internalized stigma that comes out in extra struggle that I'm still working on. So I'd rather, of course, feel more spontaneous all the time and not have struggled speech. But but I'm no longer covert at all. So I'm never in a position where I'm trying not to show it 100%. Um, and I think it feels really different for me than for people who care about me. I had a friend, um, this was like a year ago, when I said something about stuttering and it was hard in X, Y, and Z circumstance. I don't remember what I was talking about. It's a new friend who only met me in the last 10 years when I've been just out. And she said, "Oh, that's odd, but that's just who you are. Like, why? Like, is that something you really think about?" And I was like, "Wow, she just sees the tip, has no, I didn't realize she had no idea that I'm not just super cool with it all the time still, but
Mhm.
I've embraced it, but I'm not like yet at the point where it's like, yeah, that's me, take it or leave it. That's my goal."
So you mentioned a couple things you talk about, like the tip, which was a reference to the iceberg. You also mentioned being covert. So talk about your childhood a little bit, growing up as a child who stutters, and that'll give us some context.
So in thinking about this talk, I was thinking, I've had 40 years of a million moments. Like, how do I distill what I want to say or what stands out? And so I thought of my life in quadrants, in 10-year chunks. And so the first decade, um, I was not a covert person who stutters, meaning I overtly stuttered sometimes. And so obviously, I had to start stuttering. And in my case, it was right when I first started talking. I understand that's not the same for everyone, but I was under 2 and I was already stuttering. And the first evidence we have of it is a video my dad took of me saying the ABCs, and my dad loved to record us. He's a very adoring father. And he just obviously had been like, Jennifer, say the ABCs. And I'm doing it, and I was a second kid. So unlike my older sister, and actually probably because of our personalities also, I was happy to have the camera on me. And so I'm in the backyard and you can tell I'm into it. And then I get to R and you can see, my eyes look away, and I think I preform R, but I don't let any sound out. And he thinks, of course, I just have forgotten it's R. So he says R from behind the camera. And that really makes me upset because now my dad thinks I don't know the R. And then interestingly, I just walk off camera. So there's a couple of things I'm like, so before the age of 2, I had my own self-stigma. Also, there seemed to be already some conspiracy of silence for a kid who my mom described as like, I'd come home from school and tell her like how many poppy seeds were on each cracker that the nursery school teacher gave me. And my mom was like, I don't care. But it's like, rather than being like, Dad, that was so weird, I tried to say R and I couldn't, it was already like just not talked about. I just walked off. That's pretty interesting. And then as I got through and started elementary school, I just remember a couple other pieces of information I was gathering from the world. And one was we had like a resource room at our elementary school, which is just what they called like the little closet where now I know the SLP would come and take kids with any speech or language or reading problems and pull them out. And I remember feeling like I was getting away with something in early elementary school that I had never been pulled out there, and that it was like a point of pride. Like, I know I speak differently, but it can't be that bad because I've never been taken to that room. And again, like, no one talked to me about it, but I was picking up and internalizing stigma. And then in like second grade or first grade, can't remember which, we got to bring our favorite book in and read it out loud to the class. And I was young enough, I hadn't had enough bad experiences yet that I don't remember a lot of dread before. In fact, I was pumped about my book, which is called Imogene's Antlers. I have it for my kids now. It's really cute. But I just remember sitting in the teacher's rocking chair, because you got to be the one in the rocking chair when you did this. And but I just, obviously, I think what I did was block a lot, is what I remember, and feeling like I can't get through this book. And then I cried a lot to my parents that night. And then I snuck out of bed and I heard my mom crying to my dad, which, now that I'm a parent, of course, if your kid's upset, that's fine. And she wasn't trying to do it in front of me, but because I went and spied, that felt heavy. And I just thought, this is all just heavy and we're going to find like another way around this.
Oh.
And so we both started speech therapy. And also I became convicted, like, we'll just find ways to not have this come up a lot. Like, if this can just not happen a lot, then we won't have to deal with these heavy feelings. And so the messages I got from my first experience with speech therapy really dovetailed because it was fluency shaping. And so, I got chocolates from my mom, was told to like get treats by the therapist, both to treat me with after speech therapy, and then if I did certain assignments at home, which were all geared toward fluency. And I love chocolate. And it was just sort of a very explicit message, like, you get this awesome treat if you don't stutter, which really aligned with my goals too. It was like, great, we have the same goal. Like, I don't want to stutter. And so going up till about age 10, that first decade, I would look back and describe it as a time where I was like gathering both possibly innate stigma I had against my own inability sometimes to get my words out, but also like picking up a lot of environmental cues that my instincts were spot on to not do this and to try to avoid it at all costs. And so I wasn't covert. I realized I still have to define that. But I was, in the first 10 years, I got enough info to send me on a covert journey really quickly after that.
But you mentioned this conspiracy of silence even then. Do you remember, even though you were going to speech therapy at that young age, where it wasn't talked about in the home?
Um I don't want to say, I mean, I my parents talked. I remember them trying to take me to speech therapy earlier, and I feel like the person said, give it a little time. But it was usually at my request. I was like, let's do something about this.
Mhm.
Um, and then my little brother came along and stuttered too. And so, I mean, 2 out of 5 people in the home stuttered. So it wasn't um, a non-issue. I mean, it was there almost in a majority. Uh, but yeah, I think I drove a lot of that. Honestly, I think I just wanted it to go away, so I didn't want to talk about it a lot. Except I was happy to go to therapy. It was like, just take me to therapy, and these people with the fluency shaping tools, and I will just get this to go away. That's
Yeah,
sort of my
yeah,
overriding goal.
yeah. I know you're going to talk about some of these other decades too. I'd love to hear the next one because I know that must have been the decade where you experienced some of the drive to internalize it. Because at one point you did talk to me about the stomach aches on the bus and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened after that?
So by late elementary school onward, um, yeah, I had pretty much decided I was not going to stutter, and I would hit these deadlines like transitioning from elementary school to middle school, where I would feel like this is the time I really need to just nail this thing down. So I remember I did like a summer intensive fluency shaping thing because it was like, I'll just be polished up by August and go to 6th grade without a stutter, was always the hope when doing these sorts of intensives. Um, but that whole span from late elementary school on, I became covert, which means you stutter, but you try to hide it from the outside world. And so I mean, I was taking notes earlier, trying to remember I mean, it permeated every moment of every day, basically. So, um, again, rather than saying at home, I prefer not to answer the phone. And it wasn't because of my parent, because I couldn't have been honest. It's just shameful to be going to these measures or to be wanting to avoid something so simple. So I would like say I wanted to change my seat at the dinner table because whoever was closest would just grab the phone, which in the 80s and 90s would always ring during dinner with like telemarketers and stuff. And so rather than being like, I don't want to answer the phone, or obviously the ideal would have been just to answer the phone and get over it. But just being like, we had this set spots where everyone sat. And I was like, I just need to sit over there from now on, these inexplicable to everyone else. Like, why is Jenny creating such a huff? And then restaurants, leaving the table constantly to go to the bathroom and be like, oh, mom, just order me the blah, blah, blah. I'll be back. And never being around when the waiter comes. Um, trying to be invisible by all costs when going around the room doing reading in school, calling friends, and if their parents answered, hanging up, just escaping if stuttering was going to come up, just fully vanishing, like physically. um, and so Seventh grade, I had this really hard ass English teacher who everyone loved, which was confusing to me because I had such a bad experience with her, but I had been so excited to be in her class. And and she had us going around the room reading like maybe a play. I can't even remember what we were reading. And, got to my turn and I'm sitting there as it's coming. And in this particular day, I didn't have an escape for whatever reason. I didn't feel like I could go to the bathroom. It was just like, it's coming and here it is. And so, of course, because I had no practice built up for putting my voice in when there was fear and just getting through the sound. I just couldn't speak. Or eventually I did because I got something out because I remember her saying after, okay, how about you try that again in English, which is just a really, really incredibly rude thing for an educator to say to a kid with a speech problem. And I was more mortified because I tried to pass all the time that there I was in my English class with all these classmates who definitely I was making sure not to have a lot of instances where that kind of struggle was on display. So, but then on top of it, to have the teacher essentially do the bullying, it was like, oh, awesome. Um, and that was sort of middle school was pretty rough. And then by high school, it was like, okay, well, then I got to take even more drastic steps to vanish this. And so I think there were a number of times when I would have my mom say, like, she'll hand in her paper, but she's not going to present it. I think we just upped at my behest. My mom helped me just escape as much as I needed to.
Yeah. Did you confide in anyone during those years? Like friends at school? Did you have anybody who kind of shared your secret? Anybody in your box at that time?
That's so interesting because my adult relationships are really based on like sharing vulnerability and being really open, but no.
Mm.
Even my bro well, my brother a little because he was in my family and he also stuttered, but he's not, he wasn't dying to like gab about our innermost feelings. So no.
Did that create certain kinds of feelings for you? In other words, I'm thinking loneliness or isolation or anything like that. You're you're such a gregarious person. I'm just wondering what that was like for you during those teenage years.
Yeah, it was kind of split in half. So I would suppress all day and really try to only speak if I felt confident I could be fluent so that I could get these gregarious outlets in the hallways or at lunch or whatever. But then when the rubber hit the road and like I may have had something important to contribute in class, I had decided that was a place that was too scary to talk. And so I was acting out in like two different types of personalities. And the stress of worrying all day in school if I was going to be called on. For all of middle school, I rode home on the bus laying down because I had these like horrible, I don't know if it was indigestion. It was like an acidic stomach ache from stress, basically. And it physically hurt to sit up, like something about the pressure on my actual stomach. And by the time I would get home and get away from school and eat a little, it wouldn't be there all night, but it was there every day on the bus ride home.
And you remember it.
I remember it. And I sacrificed. So to your question, I was still inside, felt gregarious, but I couldn't act. I wouldn't let myself act on it half the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how did that transition into college? What were your college years like? Is leaving home? I'm assuming you left home and you're on
Mm-hmm.
your own. Couldn't have your mom order for you or make phone calls for you.
Right. So the first year I went to New York City, I went to Barnard College and I had applied early. I really thought I wanted to be in New York for college. I felt strongly in that. And I got there, and this is just a good reminder that like not all of our problems are tied to stuttering. Sometimes there's just other mistakes you make or other things you do. And I got there, and I was a really good student, um, but I wasn't super into academics. I mean, I wanted to have the college experience. So I get there, and most of the people in my hall and in my classes were super just focused on studying. And because the college was in the middle of the city, there wasn't like campus life, so to speak. It was everyone just dispersed downtown and like went out and sort of acted like 20 somethings if they went out. And so I babysat a ton. I do remember the book they had at Barnard for all the families who had signed up to have a Barnard girl be their babysitter, and looking at all the numbers, and somehow I made myself make these calls because I wanted money. And I babysat a ton to have money to go live this like adult life. And I just felt like it was just not my place. And I became depressed for the first time in my life. And so, and that year, stuttering doesn't feel in the forefront of my memory at all. It was like I was just in the wrong place for me. And so, eventually I transferred and went to Georgetown, which was physically very close to home. But my parents sort of, it was like I could call them, and they acted like I was still out of town, because I mean I was in a different world. And so I still was on my own. And um speech wise, yeah, I actually was more independent during college than I was with the big crash that happened upon graduation, which is when I met you. So by the time I was graduating, I could skate by, I could give presentations in school. I had studied abroad in Australia, and obviously my mom couldn't coordinate my life for me over there. So I had really felt like I had it all worked out. Like I was barely a person who stuttered, and I could just like navigate stuff. But then from like the 20s on, I had to get a job and stuff, and leave the college world. Oh, but the one other thing I do remember was I had jobs in college. Either I still babysat a lot, and or at restaurants. And so I was a hostess, and I remember they always wanted me to answer the phone a certain way. It was like a script. Well, a script was my worst. And I didn't want a script because a script you can't deviate from. And all I did was substitute words to get by. So, I was like friendly enough that all the staff liked me. And so I got away with it. But the managers would always be like, why do you answer the phone that way? I mean, I would say Tony and Joe's and whatever else I needed to, but it wasn't just the sentence, how they had like laid it out, like just answer the phone like this. I was like, no, I can't, specifically because you told me I had to, and now I'm too scared, And so that flies at like a restaurant when you're the hostess, whatever. But I quickly realized when I needed an actual job, like, oh, I can't just like make up rules for myself all the time.
However, I will say, I think you had this kind of routine when you met a new person that you sort of did an information dump.
Filibuster, Seth calls it. My husband. Yeah. So direct cocktail talk questions have always given me more anxiety, and thus I have struggled more. And so rather than waiting for someone to be like, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to college? All the litany of questions. Yeah, I decided when I met people, I would just give them my bio real quick, just first 2 to 5 minutes of talking. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Then they had nothing else to ask after that. You didn't, they,
Super fun to talk to.
what drove you to get help on your own?
Um, Desperation, and like total just angst over I'm cognitively and physically ready to take on adulthood, this is the thorn in my side. Like, what am I have to deal with this because I'm letting it handicap me. I'm handicapping myself. And so when I found you in arts, I didn't know what it was exactly, but after we talked the first time, while it didn't sound remotely appealing, I had that knowing like, oh, well, this is obviously the only way that I'm ever going to be able to move on. Like I just have to do this.
What
It
scared you?
rang true. Oh yeah. I mean, I had a really quaint idea at first that I would just go through group, do the work on the outside, but like in group, they would just never hear me stutter. Like I could just, I was the one who came in and didn't stutter, like every other covert person who's walked into that room. Yeah. So it was just desperation, and feeling like I don't have a path in life unless I deal with this.
Yeah. You were working at the time, I believe, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed. So after college, I mean, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had majored in philosophy, which I loved learning about, and I minored in psychology. Um, I knew I didn't want to go get a PhD and be like a practicing psychologist. That ton of extra education didn't interest me that much. But then again, I really had no plan for like a practical real world job. So I interviewed at Discovery Channel because in my mind I thought it's like a corporate job, but it's a creative place. I mean, they make all these documentaries, and it should feed my interest in creative life while actually paying me reasonably well and being a legitimate job. And the first guy I interviewed with was the head of corporate communications, which I had no idea what that was. And he's like, I remember being in his big corner office, and he's like, I mean, I think he needed like an EA, but the point was if you were interested in that part of corporate life, you could climb, obviously, if you started at 23. And I remember he was describing, well, we do all the internal and external communications. We're on the phone all day. We talk to the reporters about the new show. And I was like, oh, like I could not find the door. And he was like, great, talk to you later. Like it was so obvious that was not what I felt comfortable doing. I was totally covert at these interviews. So I am sure I was not a good communicator, but I am sure I did not allow myself to stutter. And so both of those things were very, very true at the same time. And I ended up taking a job as sort of like a production assistant, but it wasn't actual production. It was like office work. And, I would just cringe when my phone would ring because we were all at cubicles and everyone could hear. And I had interviewed and I hadn't said one thing like, oh, by the way, sometimes I might stutter. I mean, I just was. And so it was this setup for a complete crisis, obviously. And then I started to see you while I was at that job.
Mhm, mhm. And was it anything to do with communication there? Did you feel like you were unable to communicate, or
Oh,
did
yeah.
you
I
feel?
felt like I was totally stressed out all day. Really, it was around the phone. I felt better in in-person meetings, but the phone was like top of my fear hierarchy back then. And I didn't let myself quit, but eventually I once I sorted out, and I'd been at speech therapy a bit with arts, and I was like, okay, it's not just the phone, it's also that this isn't for me, like this isn't a path. Even if I get my feelings about stuttering under control, this isn't what I want to do with my life. And that's when I heard about art therapy. And I was doing arts with you, and that's when I left and went back to grad school. And I remember at the interview, they were going around the room. It was like a group part of the day where everyone who was applying was there together. You probably do that with SLPs. I don't know, maybe.
I heard from some of my clients that they do it. We don't do that in our environment, but one of my clients took an began. I guess she went into a program for OT, and they did the same thing for OT.
And I remember I promised myself on the way there, because I was already in arts, but I wasn't, I hadn't made much progress yet, but I knew what I needed to know, and which is very different than acting on it. And so I remember parallel parking in the rain and being like, you will not escape today. You're going to promise yourself, if you show up as you are and they don't take you, so be it. And when it got down to it and we're going around the circle, I was like, nope, I'm not. I want to get in this program and I'm going to jeopardize it right now. And so I got up to go to the bathroom, Um, and then I felt a lot of shame about that, but not more than I was scared I would feel if I stayed.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about your journey to change a little bit, because people want to know. I mean, you're a delightful communicator. You know that. People want to be like you and stutter. What was that journey like? And was it hard? Was it bumpy? Did you have a lot of, as we say, uh, hits or whatever we call bumps in the road along
Yeah.
that journey?
Yeah. I mean, yes, I met you and started arts when I was, I don't know, 23 or 4. So we're talking like 17 years. Not that I've been actively doing it that whole time, but I mean, I'm not where I want to go yet. So yeah, it has not been like the Audubon to recovery. And there's all different paces. So if anyone's watching this and that's discouraging, we've seen a lot of people who it is quicker, but it's really individual.
Yeah.
It's just really about what you're willing to do each day. And so as much as you want to set the pace with your intentions, you set the pace with your actions. And if
How
you
did you
don't
start out, Jenny? What did you
yeah.
start out doing? Let's say someone doesn't have the guidance that you did. Um, how do you begin such a daunting journey to become open and accepting and reduce struggle avoidance like you have?
Well, a lot of people say they don't stutter if they're alone, but I had reached such a height of anxiety when I started that if I had tried to read to myself out loud alone, I was blocking a lot because I didn't want to hear myself stutter. And it was so far beyond another listener. It started with just even me as a listener. Um, so desensitizing yourself to your stutter, even if you start literally when you're alone, if that's possible. Um, or, if you don't stutter alone, you got to pick a trust. There's got to be some person in your bubble, because you can't do this alone, because it is a disorder about interacting with people. So you need to bring one person then into your bubble to sort of slowly escalate what you'll try out with them.
Who was that in
Um,
your life?
uh, so if I look back, I was living with a girlfriend named Jen, and I had various boyfriends that I would bring into my bubble as I was dating. So when I dated in my 20s doing arts, I would always have that person in my bubble. And I remember at first it was more advertising, like, oh, I go to this group and I stutter, but it would be like months before I would actually stutter with that person. And then I moved past that, and I was definitely showing stuttering to the people I dated and to my roommate, and my parents, who I had been covert across the board, but it was easier to go uncovert with my family, who obviously knew I stuttered, than it was for sort of these places I'd backed myself into, like interviewing for a job with fluent speech, and then trying to think about how to show up one day and start stuttering. Um,
What was that like?
it was super awkward and really hard. Very worth it. I mean, I would be nowhere if I hadn't done it. But yeah, my good friend Monica at my so now I had become an art therapist, and I was working at a hospital, and the receptionist for our unit, um, I decided, I was like, I'm going to go over and tell her something, and I am not going to avoid stuttering. And so, of course, anxiety was so high that my struggle was really bad, which included, I'm sure, some blocking where it was very unclear to my friend who had known me, I don't know, for 18 months or something, and I hadn't stuttered with her. And I got out whatever I was going to say, and she laughed. I was like, I thought you were having a seizure. And, I just had to, but it was so that's the other thing about arts. It was a planned assignment. And so I could go back to group and laugh because I had told myself I was in for whatever came out, and I was in that interaction, and I was in for whatever her reaction was. It's always so much more scarring if you feel out of control, like, but I didn't say I would take that chance this time, and now I'm getting a bad reaction. So you got to bring people into your bubble, and you have to do planned assignments, the scope of which are just to slowly broaden your tolerance for stuttering.
Yeah. What are some of I know that one where you went to work and all of a sudden the person who doesn't stutter becomes the person who stutters. It's awkward and you have to adjust to that. What are some of the other memorable experience that you had while working on your speech or during those years,
Um,
particularly related to open stuttering?
yeah, I mean, then there's a lot of good that comes to mind at first, and and not that it was easy or fun at the time, but I remember I wrote a big email to my friends coming out as if I had been in the closet. And I'm sure it was like Jenny speaks differently, but I hadn't ever labeled it. And it was like, and it's going to start to change. How I'm going to be speaking is going to sound a lot more stuttery as I work through this process. And, I've had friends in all that time after connect to it, like, um, oh, I had this problem with my husband, and I was telling him, like, you know, oh, it was one friend in particular who had a husband with a pretty big anxiety issue, who was like, I was trying to tell him like what you had to work through and trying to get him to desensitize to some of his own stuff so we can like live our fullest life together. And it always feels good to be an inspiration for people. I went through at first a phase where I was a bit activist feeling and sort of would get angry with bad reactions. So I remember like at Cozy Sandwich Shop in DC once, the person made fun of me, who I was ordering from, more out of confusion, which is super common. But I was new to like taking in that interaction is exactly what I had spent 20 years trying to avoid. And so I would be like, I'm a person who stutters, and get really up and sort of with the goal of like, when I walk away, that person's going to feel bad. And like, I needed to do that, I guess, for a little while, but that doesn't interest me anymore. That was just part of the process. And then my partner, or my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, Seth, we had to work through, because by the time I met Seth, I was finally like really making progress, I think, in the therapy. And so he went to graduate school. So he moves down to UVA, and I go down, we're engaged now, and I'm commuting to hang out with him on the weekends. And we were at a party, and it was like he's meeting all these it was a business school grad program. So those are like the most hyper extroverted. I mean, I had been to this art therapy program where it's like people doodling in a corner, and like he's just with these people who are nonstop. Like, and that's something I've learned about myself. I do love to gab, but I'm not extroverted in the sense. I need a lot of also downtime, and like if we're out late, I definitely want to sleep in. He and everyone he met there are like machines who operate on like 3 hours of sleep, and it's like go network, then go to the game, then go do your homework, then go. It's just like nonstop. Um, and so I remember we were at a party and everyone's like nonstop being really extroverted. And this guy was imitating me. He's like, "Oh, you're from Bethesda?" And I was like, "Yep." Because I was past that activist angry stage. I was like, "Oh my," and I just honestly felt a little bad for this guy. I was like, well, "You're such an like not asshole, but like a unattuned, like you have no attunement to other people," because he kept at it. It's one thing if it's the first time, but he kind of imitated 3 sentences in a row, and it was like, this is just a little egregious. And he wasn't a friend of Seth's. It wasn't like someone that Seth had to like rethink how he felt about him. He was a total acquaintance to both of us. But we walked away, and Seth was really like, he's not a physical fighter. And I mean, he wanted to go over and like punch the guy and go back, and he was all upset. And so I remember I came back to group and talked about how, the people who care a lot about us have to come along too. And I mean, we can't expect them to be on exactly the same time frame because they're going to take their cues from the person who stutters. But I had moved past that wanting to like hit the guy, and he was lagging a little bit.
I love that you brought that up because we talk about that particularly among parents and children, where a
Yeah.
lot of the children that we work with, we help them to deal with the shame, to be able to feel that they can stutter openly and be who they are. And we find sometimes that parents are still feeling more shame than they are. They haven't come along with them to
Mhm.
desensitize some of that shame. So it's interesting that Seth was at a different phase than you were.
Mhm.
But he was a great support, right? Wasn't he a
Huge support. I
yeah,
mean, he
yeah,
is a very supportive individual
yeah.
in
How
all ways.
important was that for you in your therapy? First, I guess support is variable for different people. Did you need a lot of support to be able to do the hard things, the scary things, the risky things?
I did. I'm at the high end of, I think, a continuum of like, I love a lot of support. So, I mean, that's what I told him when I joined group again. I'm like, I know all the things, but you know how much I love a support group. And he's like, I know, of course, go back. I'm a very, I thrive on connection, and it physically, I can feel it empower me in a way that sometimes I can't harness on my own.
He
So
gets stuttering, doesn't he? He
well,
gets it, right?
yeah, he gets it. Um we have two daughters now, neither of which is stuttering, at least currently, but his maybe he was already like this, but I feel like being so supportive with this for me, I've seen it translate to his parenting style. Like, just,
Interesting.
everyone has something, even if it's not stuttering. And you do have to be really tolerant as a parent that you can't just do things for kids to fix them, or, and he just has I think actually he just has a natural inclination toward trusting the process and just supporting the people he loves.
Mhm. Did he have a hard time understanding the outcomes of the therapy that you were doing, that we weren't heading for fluency, that we were looking to change the form of the stuttering, to keep the identity there, to be congruent with who we were in terms of our identity and the way we presented ourselves to the world?
I'm really grateful that no one close to me pushed back at that. I think that would have been really hard on me, honestly, because I want people around me to understand what I'm doing. And be genuinely into it. And so if he or my parents um, had been like, really, what, and I know from group members that's really common, and that would have been hard.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you value most in terms of the outcomes you've achieved so far? I know that you're still on your journey, but you've made so much progress, Jenny. And um, even if you never do one more thing, you still stutter beautifully and a great communicator, which is the most important thing. But for you, what were the most important outcomes, and what are they for you? Do you still have outcomes that you'd like to achieve?
Okay, so the ones that I have achieved, um, I mean, I don't walk around like I in that huge cloud hanging over my head from the moment before I opened my eyes. I remember the alarm would go off, and it would be like, which classes do I have today in high school? Which teacher might call on me? I mean, it was all encompassing. Um, I didn't grow up spiritual at all or religious, but for a while I like prayed every night before bed for specific speech things the next day. I mean, we were not a prayer family. Um, so just to have all of that gone, it's like any other pain that we have. It's all you can think about if you have it. And then when it's gone, it's easy to forget how bad it was. And, I'm very grateful I have to like really center myself and think to remember what a burden daily life felt like. And I really disliked not being able to authentically connect with people, not choosing to not authentically connect with people, because I preferred to just not stutter. Um, and so a huge outcome that I'm super happy with is I moved to Colorado 10 years ago, almost like basically. And, I did not arrive here as a covert person. I arrived very overtly stuttering. And this whole life now I have here, everyone I've met has only known me as a person who stutters. And I've made a million really good friends, like true, just awesome friends. And I still have all my old ones who, dealt with my coming out email and just rode through a change. And now, it's weird for me to look back because I've been friends with my old friends as a person who stutters longer than I ever was as a covert person. If I picked them up like in high school or college, that was really only a few years. And then we've had this whole other chunk. And so just to have one identity that I present to myself and to everyone else is a huge outcome that I very much celebrate.
Do you still celebrate fluency?
I don't celebrate it, but I have more work to do for tolerating disfluency. I don't, it sounds like how can that both be true? But no, I don't, like I know too much about how this all works that actually it's the opposite. If I walk away and maybe it's like a new person, and if I'm like, I either had just random fluency or I avoid, like I did a couple postponements. So I stuttered, but not as bad as it could have been. I'm like, ooh, I'm going to pay for that. Like I have a bad feeling, I'm like, that's not the way. So I actually feel guilty a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure how you're going to relate to this question. Some people these days talk about stuttering pride and stuttering gain, even. Do you relate to that concept at all?
Not, no, but I mean, every day we're changing, and I've changed a lot of my thoughts about what stuttering even is. So, not ruling that out, but in the real world, that is when I'm not at an NSA conference or a say gala or an interview with you. No, I don't feel a lot of pride out in the everyday world about this. I mean, I feel personal pride at how far I've come, but that's different than I think just pride every time I stutter or something.
Mhm.
No.
Is there such a thing as stuttering gain? Are there things that you have gained because you're a person who stutter? Is there a positive side of it all?
Um, well, just people. I mean, I've met really awesome people. Um, and that would be my huge one. Um, I think I say that I've said this before. I think I still feel this way. I mean, I had such a privileged life that it it was good to take me down a notch from everything being so easy. And I'm not saying that to brag about abilities, but just like nuclear family, enough money, like just things were just easy. And so certainly I think I'm empathetic as I'm wired, but this is certainly not detracted from any natural sense of empathy I have. Um, and for future gains still, I mean, I want to be as spontaneous and comfortable in every setting as I am in the comfortable ones, because um, I was listening to a podcast and I heard there's a organizational psychologist named Adam Grant. Have you heard of his stuff? And he was talking, and he was not he was just the guest, so that's how I heard of him. And I guess there's these old 5 personality traits or personality categories or something. I don't know. But he's like, I would like to add one that I think should be part of it. And it is like where you fit on a scale of self monitoring. And so, like the high self monitorers will adapt to what they perceive expectations are in any situation. And if you're really low on that scale, you just are who you are wherever you go. Um, and I'm definitely a high self monitorer. And it's interesting because I come like neither of my parents I would categorize as even, I think they're both on the low average of self monitoring. They just are who they are. And so, A, that's interesting. But B, um, I think it's that aspect that I have let hold me back more than the stuttering, because with that as a core of how I came out, if it wasn't stuttering, I probably would have had invented some other thing to stand in my way. Um, is what I've come to realize. And so I feel like in life we've got family. I mean, um, stuttering has not gotten in the way of I've made a family I love very much and super happy. I wouldn't have wanted that to go any other way. And there were other realms I was thinking of, but then the other, like personal, like my friendships, everything are great. But professional, I mean, I loved art therapy a lot, and it definitely spoke to and fed a lot of, came from who I am. But I would be lying to myself to say there wasn't obviously a part of that choice. I mean, I didn't become a press secretary, like there was definitely stuttering. Also, it worked out for being like not too much pressure on speech. And then the same thing, I have loved being a stay-at-home parent big time, but I'd be lying to myself to say there wasn't a part of it or it was also just easier. And so I've been thinking a lot recently. I'm finally coming up on, assuming my kids can go back to school next year, which I'm hoping. It'll be the first time since I became a mom that both of my kids will be in full-time school. And so all of a sudden I'll have 7 hours a day. And I've been thinking, what do I want to go back to work to do? And I think that art therapy just doesn't speak to me as much right now. I mean, partly the population I would love to work with, it would be a big commute, and I'm not gonna within school hours, I'm not gonna do that. But also I feel it's time to like push myself more speech wise. And with everything going on in the world, I'm feeling more bigger activism calls than helping one child at a time. And so I'm thinking about organizations like um, Every Town for gun safety, or environmental. Like, I'm just thinking, now that everyone can work from home, like I can get some part-time job for a cause that I feel passionate about. And I think that last sphere of conquering anxiety in the professional realm, which I started to do with arts, and then I took this huge pause, that will feel like a capstone to my progress as well.
It's so interesting that you brought up this idea of advocacy work in various organizations, because I was going to ask you anyway about your advocacy work for children who stutter.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because
Yeah. So
making a great contribution in that area.
thank you. So there's an organization called SAY, the Stuttering Association for the Young, and they do lots of arts programs for kids who stutter. So after school, like singer, songwriter, playwriting, and then they run a summer camp, a sleepaway camp for kids and teens who stutter. And I've been on the board since, well, for a long time, but when I connected with them, it was when I was in my low point, around when I connected with you. And there was some connection that got me to them. And I got an amazing inspirational email back from Taro, who was the founder and at the time the head of it. And I love doing that work. I also do want to expand beyond the stuttering community.
Wow. Can't wait to see what you do next, Jenny.
Well, there's a lot to work on.
I want to go back to something that you said, because I think it's important, and we went through it kind of quickly. You mentioned your value, that you value spontaneity, and that's sort of where you want to be,
Mhm.
spontaneous in all of your interactions and all of your communication. Um, I'm wondering if people are maybe listening to you right now and are thinking about, I want to control my stuttering. Once I get this under control, it'll be okay. And can you talk a little bit about your how you reconcile this need to control the stuttering and your need or your value of spontaneity, and how those two concepts kind of go together for you or not
Yeah.
go together for you?
Yeah, they're like oil and water. I It's a natural draw, and I certainly to control, or attempt to control. Um, I mean, I almost feel grateful that I hit a really rock bottom where my attempts to control, and if can't control, then just hide, got so stressful that I almost was unable to talk. Like the first time I came into your office, I couldn't even utter like a one syllable word, because there was also the added stress. Okay, now I'm in the room with the speech therapist, and I only want her to think I stutter this much. So then, of course, then I get anxious and then I stutter this much, you know? And so, eh, yeah, it's very lucky in that sense to hit a real crisis point, because don't know how much longer I would have clung to thinking control was the answer if I had been able to skate by. So if you're someone watching who's still skating by, hopefully you have like the will to sort of understand this and take action before you get too low. I didn't. I mean, I was at a point where it was just super obvious. Spontaneity didn't sound as great as like control and being fluent, but since I knew I couldn't control and be fluent, I had to try the other path. And yeah, and I mean, that was almost 20 years ago, and the only things I crave are to be further along the path I'm on. There is never ever ever any thought of wanting to go back. It's just like, oh, thank God I survived that way of living. I would never do that again. um
I think I would love for you to talk about your current pattern, because if people are listening now and they're saying, wow, you stutter so beautifully. what kind of strategy are you using right now, Jenny, to move through some of those disfluencies? Talk about the lack of, or are you using why does your stuttering sound so comfortable?
Well, I'm comfortable speaking with you. And my work is yeah, so there are no strategies once you're following an arts path. And I'm fully on the arts path. And so what I'm doing is when my natural disfluencies arise, I can see them like everyone who stutters a couple words ahead. And all I do right now is tell my brain to not do what had become a reflexive postponement. Just a little pause, and then you can hop on the word, or a little elongation of this syllable prior, and you can then just like jump onto the word. So I'm not doing any strategies. I'm just trying to give myself, my brain, constant reminders to not do the old tricks, which can be done still in poppy seed size amounts, to the point you can trick yourself that you're not doing them anymore, but they're so automatic. I mean, they're lifelong. And so the only strategy I'm using is to remind myself not to use escape behaviors.
Okay,
Basically.
fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. Um, what about this idea that what's ahead for you? Um, I know that you've come back to speech therapy. You feel that you have some work to do still
Mhm,
in terms of being the communicator that you want to be. Suppose tomorrow morning you woke up and boom, you are that person.
mhm.
What would be different in your life?
Yeah, I'd be able to dial down my self monitoring tendency so that um, my spontaneity and comfort with speech wasn't so situationally dependent. I mean, if I'm trying to make chit chat with an adult who just seems a little bit like taking too long, or they're just kind of annoyed with the way I talk, I mean, I'll instantly become more struggle, or I will literally then trying to use the language of responsibility. But yes, I will struggle more in trying to in this it's a backward effect. I'm trying to somehow make it easier on the listener, but all it does is dial up the struggle. And so if I were to wake up tomorrow, all I'm really going for is the final step of that, like, one identity. And it's that I don't need to I don't need to struggle more in tense or arguments or defending myself or power differential, like the things that still trip me up. And they don't send me to be covert, but they just send me into excess struggle that I don't need. And so I'm working on that last step, and it really has less to do about stuttering and more about the interpersonal communication aspect of, like, it's not my job to monitor everyone else's micro feedbacks I'm getting.
Yeah.
So that's really all I want to do still.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. A couple times during our conversation, you mentioned your role as a mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, and you're a great mom too, because I've seen you in action. Um, Suppose there's a mom watching this video. I'm just imagining who has a child who stutters. What advice, if that mom called you and said, "Hey Jenny, I saw you on this video, and I will be absolutely delighted if my daughter turns out like you." What advice would you give that mom? And I'm sure you might have thought about this since you might have a child who stutters, but I'm
Yeah.
just wondering if you have some advice for moms.
Yeah. To really make eye contact and not act hurried around the child, if, extra than if there's actually a hurry. To not have it be a conspiracy of silence. So if the kid bumps, say, "Whoa, that was bumpy, but you got it out." So have it be something that can be talked about, like, X school subject is a challenge for you, or you don't prefer this teacher. It's like, oh, and sometimes when you talk, your speech is bumpy. I think getting it into the open is really good for kids, and then not harping on it and treating it matter of factly, even if, inside you feel panicky about what this could mean for their future. Um, Obviously try not to transmit that while not taking it off the table for discussion at all. Um, and then, just, if you want to get them help, just be aware that most places you might encounter are going to give them techniques to suppress it. And it's going to communicate both overtly, covertly, in a million different languages to the kid that it's something to suppress. And so if you go down that road, depending on the kid's temperament, it could be a big climb out if they ever discover those techniques don't actually work for them, and now they want to try to just be who they are. There's a lot to undo there.
Well, Jenny, I want to say as always, it's always fun to talk to you, whether we're talking about stuttering or talking about anything else. So thanks for doing this and joining us
Thank
on Open
you.
Stutter and providing your insight to people who are interested about learning about open stuttering and how they can help themselves and
I'm
others.
so excited about this because, as I said, I'm entering my feeling like I need to help make some microscopic help for changes that need to happen in all sorts of society um, issues. But this, I love the impetus behind this, which is just to get good information out there for free and widely accessible.